NBA 2K23 drops really soon, and while we don't know a ton about the game right now, we have learned 10 important things about the upcoming game based on the early playtest that took place not that long ago. Some YouTubers and also NBA players were down at 2K playing the test build version of the game, and Shakedown over on YouTube put out a long video about his hands-on impressions, and I've broken it down into 10 important things. Number 1, as some of you know, there is a new shot meter in 2K23, and this is what it looks like here on the screen. But what they've also done this year is they have changed the dunk meter, which was in the game for the first time last year. Some people like the dunk meter, some people hated it. Me personally, I think it's fine. I think it gives you a little bit more of a tiny skill gap when it comes to dunking, but I think a lot of people didn't really like the dunk meter itself. Well, this year it appears that they have changed the dunk meter to mimic the shot meter. So the new shot meter that we're getting this year, the dunk meter is supposedly going to be either the same as this or it's really similar. And I think it's good that they're changing it to look like the shot meter. There's no need to have two different meters in the game. Number 2, when you get a green release in NBA 2K23, the green animation pops up with a little bit of a delay now. So it kind of adds more suspense to whether or not you're actually greening the shot. I don't really know how I personally feel about this one. I'd rather just kind of know right away if it's a green or not. I don't really see how it's good or bad to really change this. It kind of just seems like change for the sake of change, but that is supposedly something that will be happening in NBA 2K23. Really quickly, if you're enjoying this video and you don't want to miss out on the other 2K23 videos I'm going to be dropping, make sure to subscribe and turn the bell icon on so you don't miss those videos. We're trying to hit 5,000 subscribers before the release of 2K23, so if everybody watching just subscribed, we could hit that number today. Number 3, NBA 2K23 game speed feels slower than 2K22, and along with this, the shot speed is also noticeably slower. This was also further confirmed by NBA player Scotty Barnes, who said the same exact thing on one of his live streams a few days ago. He said the game does feel slower and the shot speed feels slower than last year. Now, I feel like 2K usually does feel slower at the beginning of the year, or when people play the test versions, they always say the game feels slower, and usually people complain when the game comes out and they wind up speeding it back up after an update or two. But the game always is going to have a slightly different feel year to year. It's going to be mostly the same, but they start tweaking certain things, they might slow certain things down, and it just gives you a whole different overall feel of the game, and people usually feel like, hey, this is a little too slow, I want it back to how it felt before, and then they just go and change it. Now, some people say that a slow NBA 2K is a bad NBA 2K and it's not that much fun, but I would disagree because there have been some slower NBA 2Ks that have been good, like 2K16, and I believe 19 was a slower game as well. Those were good games. It's just about finding the right balance, because yes, when they slow the game down, they're aiming for more realism, and it is a simulation game, but you also have to find the balance between realism and video game, because if you make it too slow, then the game just feels boring to a lot of people, but if you make it way too fast, then it becomes a little too arcadey. So you still have to gamify things and find that right balance. Sometimes slowing things down just a little bit will give you that right amount of realism, but you just can't go too far one way or the other. While we're on the topic of realism, that brings us into number 4. Multiple people have said that NBA 2K23 feels a lot more realistic. Now, every sports game literally says this every year. People that play it, the company themselves, it always feels more realistic, but when the game drops, it's not always the case. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. And in the case where it is more realistic, usually after an update or two, the game starts to revert back to its old ways, and it gets a little bit further away from realism. Ronnie 2K even said himself in a recent interview that, I'm really excited for our gameplay. 2K23 feels different. It feels great. It's the whole system. It's just smoother. It's our 3rd year on next gen, so we've done a lot of what our customers want, and we're trying to make the evolution towards the best game that we can put out there. Again, game companies say this every year when it comes to sports games. It's not always the case, but people that have played the game have said it did feel more realistic, and part of that probably is them slowing down the game. Shakedown also said on his channel that the game just felt less twitchy, it felt less zigzaggy. Obviously, you could still put together combos and speed boosts certain ways, but it seemed like they've cut down on it a lot. They've tried to cut down on a lot of the cheese, as people would call it, and just make it feel more like a realistic basketball game. But again, once the game comes out and it goes through multiple updates, that's when we'll truly know what the state of the game is like. Many sports games feel great that first month when they don't touch it too much and they're not tweaking and updating everything, but it's a couple months later where you really get the finished product, where they kind of settle in, they keep readjusting, and then the game stays mostly that way for the remainder of its life, and that's when you truly know what the game is gonna be like. Number 5, you can contest shots from further away, but the shot contest itself doesn't affect the shot success as much as it did in years past, which really this this means is that, yes, you can kind of close out and close that space a little quicker now, but if it's a late contest, you're going to make more of those shots than you did in the past. That was something that was always kind of iffy with the game. Late contests would still affect your shot a little bit too much. This is also something Scotty Barnes said on his live stream as well. He said it felt like you could get shots off even if they were contested, especially if they were late contests. But part of what goes into this also is the fact that they said that the shot speed was slower as well. So maybe that is kind of going hand in hand on why it feels like you can close out much quicker, but it's also not affecting you as much because it's taking that into account. And in terms of the shot speed being slow, I think for a big group of people that play the game, that's not going to be as big of an issue because they're going to create their own jump shots anyway and find the fastest way to get the ball off regardless. Number 6, post scoring seems to be kind of overpowered in the test version of the game. Very easy to green these post moves. Now again, it is just a test version of the game. It is very close to being finished, but it's not completely tweaked and polished yet. So certain things could be OP in a test build or a beta build, and then by the time the game comes out, it can be a lot better balanced. But we know with a lot of different sports games, if you've played the early builds that are a month or two away from release, they're usually pretty much like that when they release for the most part. Now, post scoring has still been really good in some of these previous 2Ks as well, so I don't think this is that big of a deal. Maybe it's a little bit easier. We'll see when the game comes out. Number 7, on-ball defense got buffed in NBA 2K23 and you get more bumps now. I've definitely heard this from multiple people as well watching their videos. It's definitely an area of the game that can always use more help. The defense in the game is usually pretty suspect. Now don't get me wrong, there's guys that have the lock builds that are really good at what they do and they can clamp stuff up, but I think from an overall game perspective, this is an area where it did need a little bit of a buff. And on the Best Buy website where they had a little bit of information on the game posted over a week ago, it mentioned something about shading on defense, which I think probably goes hand in hand with this. It's probably easier to bump players now and to shade one side or the other to try to cut down on some of the zigzag and some of the speed boosting cheese that's in the game. And from everything we've heard about 2K23 so far, which isn't much, it sounds like there was a big focus on trying to cut down on a lot of the cheesy and exploited things. So it does kind of go hand in hand with what we've already heard. It just depends on how true this holds when the game comes out after multiple updates. Also, after certain players find the new cheesy things in the game, how are things going to change from that point forward? Number 8, left stick dribbling still seems to be somewhat of a problem, still seems to be a little OP in the test version. Now this kind of contrasts the previous thing we just talked about, but left stick dribbling has kind of always been a problem. I don't expect it to not still be somewhat OP. Just because on-ball defense is better and got buffed doesn't mean that left stick dribbling as a whole isn't gonna still be good. So it sounds like while on-ball defense is better and you might be able to cut down on some of this stuff, left stick dribbling is still going to be something that's pretty OP unless something changes from now until release. Number 9, it's harder to get chased down and normal blocks in the paint now if you're not an elite defender. Now I don't have a problem with this because last year you definitely could just block anybody with anybody, it seemed like at times. It was a little OP. Now don't get me wrong, paint defense as a whole I think could use a buff. I think paint defense as a whole is not very good, but when specifically just talking about the chase down blocks, those were a little out of control, and they talked about how it was harder to pull those off in this game. So again, things that were exploits, things that people were taking advantage of, these sports games are always going to try to nerf those things. They're going to try to buff other things to counter them because they don't want the same thing taking over year after year. And number 10, not that this should be a big surprise, multiple people that have played the game have said it's very similar to 2K22 Next Gen. Which, hey, welcome to yearly sports games. They're always going to pretty much be similar to the previous year's version. They might feel different, but they're still going to be similar because not much is going to drastically change from one year to another. It's really about, can you balance the game better? Can you add some new features into the gameplay to help the game play better? Can you maybe bring something back that was fun before and that we didn't want taken away? Those are the little changes you're going to see, but from an overall game perspective, if you play 2K22 Next Gen, it's probably not going to feel a whole lot different. Based on what we know, it's probably going to feel a little slower, the defense is going to be buffed a little bit, and you're going to have a new shot meter, and that's probably the gist of it. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. I'm going to be dropping 2K23 videos all year long.